The round wooden door was sealed shut with 3 inches of ice when Maya first saw her inheritance. Standing in the Alaskan wilderness, 8 months pregnant, and clutching the only thing her cheating husband hadn't stolen, her great-aunt's house keys, she had nowhere else to go. The Hobbit house looked like something from a fairy tale, buried under decades of snow and abandonment. But Maya wasn't just any desperate woman. She was a former forensic archaeologist who'd given up her career for marriage, and something about this place felt wrong. The windows were boarded from the inside. The chimney showed no signs of use, yet the house had been lived in recently. When she finally broke through the ice and stepped inside, Maya's blood ran cold. The house was perfectly preserved, as if someone had just stepped out for tea 60 years ago. Fresh flowers sat in a vase, a fire was laid but never lit, and on the kitchen table sat a birth certificate with her grandmother's name, dated 20 years after her grandmother had supposedly died. What family secret had been buried in this frozen house for decades? Maya's hands trembled as she picked up the document, her archaeologist's training warring with her emotional exhaustion. The paper felt authentic, aged, but not artificially, with the kind of slight yellowing that came from real time. Eleanor Whitmore, born March 15, 1963. But that was impossible. Her grandmother, Eleanor, had died in 1943 during World War II, when Maya's mother was just 3 years old. The family had the death certificate, the telegrams from the War Office. The baby kicked hard against her ribs, as if sensing her distress. Maya pressed a hand to her swollen belly and forced herself to breathe. She'd driven 18 hours straight from Anchorage after discovering David's betrayal, surviving on gas station coffee and sheer stubborn will. Her savings account emptied, their joint checking cleaned out. Even her emergency credit cards had been maxed out on charges she didn't recognize. The divorce papers David had so thoughtfully left on their kitchen counter made it clear she'd get nothing from their prenup. But Great-Aunt Cordelia's lawyer had been insistent. The house was hers, along with certain family items of significance. Maya had never heard of a Cordelia Whitmore until 3 days ago, but the inheritance papers were legitimate. More legitimate than her marriage, apparently. She set the birth certificate down carefully and surveyed the rest of the single room. The preservation was extraordinary and scientifically impossible. The flowers in the glass vase weren't just fresh, they were vibrant, as if they'd been picked that morning. Daffodils, which didn't grow wild in Alaska. The air itself felt different, warmer than it should be given the frozen door and boarded windows. A stone fireplace dominated one curved wall, built into what appeared to be a natural hillside. Hand-woven rugs covered wide plank floors that showed no signs of rot or pest damage. Books lined built-in shelves, their spines unfaded. Maya ran her finger along one shelf, coming away with dust that glittered strangely in the dim light filtering through cracks in the window boards. Her phone had no signal, hadn't for the last 50 miles, but she didn't need GPS to know she was completely isolated. The nearest town was Whittier, a 4-hour drive on roads that barely qualified as such. She'd passed exactly 2 other vehicles on the journey, both heading in the opposite direction. The baby kicked again, harder this time. Maya grimaced and lowered herself into a wooden chair that creaked but held. She was due in 4 weeks, though her obstetrician had warned that first babies often came early. The thought of giving birth alone in this impossible place should have terrified her, but instead she felt an odd sense of belonging. She opened one of the books at random. The pages were covered in handwriting she almost recognized, though the ink looked far too fresh for the 1940s date on the inside cover. The text wasn't in English, at least not entirely. Some words were familiar, others seemed to shimmer and change when she looked at them directly. A loose photograph slipped from between the pages and fluttered to the floor. Maya bent awkwardly to retrieve it and nearly dropped it again in shock. The black and white image showed 2 women standing in front of this very house, but the house looked new, lived in. One woman was clearly her grandmother Eleanor, but older than in any photo Maya had ever seen. The other woman bore a striking resemblance to Maya herself. On the back, in that same almost familiar handwriting, Eleanor and Cordelia, 1965. The protection holds, but the bloodline must continue. Maya's breath misted in the suddenly cold air, though the temperature hadn't seemed to change. Outside, wind began to howl through the trees, and something that might have been wolves answered from deeper in the wilderness. She was 8 months pregnant, broke, and apparently trapped in a house that shouldn't exist, holding evidence that her family history was built on lies. But Maya had spent years uncovering buried secrets. Whatever was hidden here, she was going to find it. The letter arrived on a Tuesday morning when Luna's back was screaming from another sleepless night, and the baby was doing somersaults against her ribs. She almost threw it away with the rest of the mail, bills, advertisements, and condolence cards she couldn't bear to open. But the return address made her pause. Whitmore and Associates, Anchorage, Alaska. Luna had never been to Alaska. She barely remembered having a grandmother. Standing in her cramped Seattle apartment, surrounded by half-packed boxes and the detritus of her failed marriage, she tore open the envelope with shaking fingers. The letterhead was expensive, embossed, the kind of paper that meant serious money. Dear Miss Blackwood, I regret to inform you of the passing of your grandmother, Celeste Blackwood. As executor of her estate, I must advise you that you are the sole beneficiary of her property located at coordinates 64.8377 degree N, 147.7, 164 degree W, approximately 40 miles northeast of Fairbanks. The property transfer requires your immediate attention. Please contact our office at your earliest convenience. Sincerely, Harold Whitmore, Esquire. Luna read the letter 3 times before the words began to make sense. Grandmother, property, sole beneficiary. She sank onto her couch, one hand instinctively moving to her rounded belly. The baby responded with a sharp kick that made her wince. 7 months along and already showing attitude, definitely David's child. But David was gone now, and Luna was alone with mounting debts and a baby coming in 10 weeks. The architectural firm had let her go last month, citing restructuring, though she knew it was really about the pregnancy. Who wanted to hire a single mother with morning sickness and swollen ankles? Alaska. She tried to picture her grandmother's face and came up empty. There had been arguments when Luna was small, hushed, angry voices behind closed doors. Her mother speaking Celeste's name like a curse. She's dangerous, Richard. Promise me you'll never let Luna near her. Luna had been 8 when her parents died in the car crash. She'd gone to live with her mother's sister in Portland, and Celeste Blackwood had become nothing more than a shadow, a name mentioned in whispers and then forgotten entirely. Until now. The next morning, Luna called the lawyer. Harold Whitmore had a voice like gravel, worn smooth by decades of legal speak. Miss Blackwood, thank you for calling. I know this must come as quite a shock. I barely knew I had a grandmother, Luna said, pacing her small kitchen. Why would she leave me anything? A pause. Your grandmother was particular about family bloodlines. You're the last of the Blackwood line, Miss Blackwood. She felt strongly that the property should remain in the family. What kind of property are we talking about? A cabin? Another pause, longer this time. It's unique. Your grandmother built it herself over many years. I think it would be best if you saw it in person. I'm 7 months pregnant, Mr. Whitmore. I can't just fly to Alaska on a whim. The property comes with significant mineral rights, he said quietly. The initial survey suggests deposits worth well into 7 figures. Luna stopped pacing. 7 figures. Enough to pay off her debts, raise the baby, maybe even start her own firm. Enough to build a real life. There is one condition, Whitmore continued. You must take possession within 30 days, or the property reverts to the state. Your grandmother was very specific about the timeline. Of course there's a catch. Luna pressed her fingers to her temples, fighting the familiar pressure of a headache. And this property, it's livable? Oh yes, quite livable though isolated. The nearest neighbor is 50 miles away. Your grandmother lived there alone for over 40 years. 40 years alone in the Alaskan wilderness. Luna tried to imagine it and failed. What kind of person chose that kind of isolation? That night she dreamed of ice and darkness. She was walking through snow that came up to her knees, her pregnant belly making each step a struggle. In the distance, she could see a light, warm and golden, beckoning her forward. But when she tried to reach it, the snow turned to quicksand, pulling her down. She woke gasping, her heart hammering against her ribs. The baby was moving restlessly, as if it too had been disturbed by the dream. Luna got up and made tea with shaking hands, standing at her kitchen window to watch the Seattle skyline. Somewhere out there in the darkness, David was probably asleep in his new girlfriend's bed, untroubled by thoughts of the child he'd abandoned. She pulled out her laptop and searched for flights to Fairbanks. The prices made her stomach clench, but she had just enough left on her credit card. Barely. As she typed in her information, Luna felt something shift inside her. Not the baby, but something deeper. A sense of inevitability, as if she'd been walking toward this moment her entire life. She hit purchase before she could change her mind. The volcanic glass key turned with surprising ease, and Maya stepped into what should have been impossible. The round house defied every law of architecture she'd ever known. From outside, it couldn't have been more than 20 feet across, yet the interior stretched before her like a cathedral nave, with corridors branching off in directions that shouldn't exist. Crystalline formations jutted from the walls at odd angles, pulsing with an inner light that made her grandmother's sketches seem suddenly, unnervingly real. The air hummed with energy that made her skin tingle and her unborn child flutter restlessly. "This isn't real," she whispered. But her voice echoed back from impossible distances, carrying harmonics that sounded like wind through mountain passes she'd never seen. Maya pulled out her phone to call someone, anyone, but the screen showed no signal bars. Instead, runic symbols flickered across the display before it went completely dark. She pressed the power button frantically, but nothing happened. A leather-bound journal lay open on a pedestal in the center of the main chamber, its pages fluttering despite the absence of any breeze. Maya approached cautiously, her hand instinctively protecting her belly. The writing was in her grandmother's careful script, but the words seemed to shift and change as she read them. The time draws near when the barriers grow thin. The treasure of both worlds rests in the bloodline of those who remember. Guard well what was entrusted to us, for darkness stirs in the deep places. Maya's breath caught. Below the text was a drawing of a woman who looked remarkably like herself, standing before a great tree whose roots and branches seemed to connect multiple worlds. Around the woman's neck hung an amulet that Maya had seen before, in a wooden box her grandmother had given her years ago, dismissed as costume jewelry. She'd packed it somewhere in her meager belongings, thinking it might be worth pawning if things got desperate enough. Now, staring at the detailed illustration, she remembered her grandmother's words, "Keep this safe little star. Someday you'll understand its importance." The journal's pages turned of their own accord, revealing maps of places that existed in no geography textbook. Mountain ranges with unpronounceable names, forests marked with warnings in multiple languages, and cities that seemed to float among the clouds. But it was the final page that made Maya's knees buckle. A family tree sprawled across the parchment, with names dating back centuries. At the bottom, in fresh ink that couldn't have been there moments before, were 2 new entries: Maya Eriksdotter, and below that, connected by a thin line, the unborn guardian. The house shuddered around her, and Maya heard something that made her blood freeze, the sound of heavy footsteps on the impossible staircase that spiraled up into shadows. But these weren't human footsteps. They were too measured, too heavy, and accompanied by a rhythmic tapping like claws on stone. Maya grabbed the journal and backed toward the entrance, but the door had vanished. Where it should have been, the wall showed only smooth volcanic glass reflecting her terrified face. She spun around, searching for another exit, but the corridors that had branched off in all directions were gone too. The house had rearranged itself around her, trapping her in the central chamber. The footsteps grew closer, and with them came a voice that seemed to emerge from the stones themselves, ancient, patient, and utterly inhuman. "Guardian, it called, the word stretching like a sigh through the crystalline formations. "We have waited so long for your return." A figure emerged from the shadows at the top of the staircase, and Maya bit back a scream. It was tall and gaunt, with skin like polished marble and eyes that held the depth of centuries. Despite its alien features, there was nothing threatening in its posture. If anything, it seemed relieved. "Do not fear me, daughter of Astrid," the being said, descending the stairs with fluid grace. "I am Eirinder, keeper of the threshold. Your grandmother spoke of you often during our long watches." "This is impossible," Maya whispered, clutching the journal to her chest. "None of this is real." Eirinder smiled, an expression both alien and oddly comforting. "Your world has forgotten much in its rush toward what it calls progress. But the old ways remain, hidden in places like this, protected by bloodlines like yours." The being gestured toward the journal in Maya's hands. "The darkness your grandmother wrote of has begun to stir. The barriers between worlds weaken with each passing day, and there are those who would exploit the chaos for their own ends. The treasure she guarded, that you now must guard, is the only thing that can seal the rifts before they tear both realities apart." Maya felt her child move again, more urgently this time, as if responding to Erinder's words. The truth settled over her like a weight she wasn't sure she could bear. Her grandmother's eccentric stories hadn't been stories at all. They had been preparation. The basement door stood ajar, exhaling cold air that carried scents Maya couldn't identify. Something between pine needles and ozone, with an underlying sweetness like honey left too long in sunlight. She'd been avoiding it for 3 days, telling herself she needed to focus on practical matters, finding the circuit breaker, checking the plumbing, inventorying what little food remained in Aunt Sigrid's sparse pantry. But the door called to her, especially in the quiet hours before dawn, when the baby's restless movements woke her from fitful sleep. Maya descended the wooden steps, her hand trailing along the stone wall. The basement felt older than the house above, carved rather than built, its walls smooth and curving in ways that defied the angular architecture she'd explored upstairs. Battery-powered lanterns, when had she brought those down, cast dancing shadows that seemed to move independent of their light sources. The space opened into a circular chamber far larger than the house's footprint should have allowed. Maya stopped at the bottom step, her rational mind struggling to process the impossibility. Crystalline formations jutted from the walls, pulsing with a soft blue-white luminescence that made the lanterns unnecessary. The air hummed with an energy she felt in her bones, a vibration that resonated with the flutter of life in her belly. A leather-bound journal lay open on a stone pedestal in the chamber's center. Maya approached it slowly, her footsteps echoing strangely in the space. The pages were covered in Aunt Sigrid's careful handwriting, interspersed with symbols that hurt to look at directly. "Maya will come." Read the first line she could focus on. "The bloodline calls to bloodline, and the child carries both worlds in its veins." Her hands trembled as she turned the pages. Sketches of creatures that belonged in medieval bestiaries stared back at her. Wolves with human eyes, birds made of starlight, trees that walked on root legs. But these weren't fantasies. The detail was too precise, too clinical, accompanied by notes about behavior patterns and migration routes between here and there. "The threshold weakens." Another entry began. "The barriers between Midgard and Alfheim grow thin. The old compact fails, and shadow things seep through the cracks. We need a bridge walker, someone who belongs to both worlds. The child will be that bridge if Maya chooses to let it be." Maya's knees buckled. She sank onto a stone bench that she was certain hadn't been there moments before. The journal clutched against her chest. The baby kicked sharply, and for an instant, she could have sworn she felt something kick back from outside her womb. A greeting, an acknowledgement. "This is insane," she whispered, but the words felt hollow in the humming chamber. She thought of David, of his dismissive laugh when she'd mentioned feeling different during her pregnancy, of his casual cruelty, the way he'd discarded her when she'd become inconvenient, of the eviction notice that had driven her here, to this impossible inheritance from an aunt who Dee never visited, never called, never acknowledged Maya's existence until death made her generous. Or had Sigrid been watching all along, waiting for the right moment? Maya opened the journal again, flipping to pages near the end. Her aunt's handwriting grew more urgent, less careful. The signs accelerate. Reports from the other threshold keepers confirm it. The barriers fail faster than anticipated. Shadow riders probe the weak points. The humans won't understand until it's too late, until their world is overrun by things they can't comprehend or fight. But the child could seal the rifts permanently, or open them forever. The choice will be Maya's, but she must choose soon. Third trimester brings the awakening. Maya's hand moved instinctively to her rounded belly. 26 weeks, third trimester. The timing of her arrival here suddenly seemed less like coincidence and more like cosmic inevitability. A sound echoed from the far side of the chamber. Not quite wind, not quite voices. Maya looked up to see that one wall had become translucent, revealing a landscape that definitely wasn't Iceland. Rolling hills covered in silver grass stretched toward a sky painted in shades of violet and gold. Creatures moved in the distance, too far away to identify, but unmistakably alive, unmistakably magical. The baby kicked again, harder this time, and Maya gasped as a wave of something washed over her. Not quite vision, not quite memory. She saw herself walking through that silver landscape, her child toddling beside her, both of them welcomed by beings that looked almost human but moved like living light. She saw the same child older, standing at the boundary between worlds, hands raised as reality bent around them. She saw David's world, the world she'd fled, overrun by creeping darkness, consumed by things that should not exist. And she saw herself choosing. The translucent wall solidified back into crystal-veined stone, but the echo of otherworldly wind remained. Maya closed the journal and stood, her decision crystallizing like ice forming on still water. She couldn't go back. There was nothing to go back to. But forward led into legend. The cold bit through Emma's jacket as she stood before the most peculiar house she'd ever seen. What she'd expected to be underground was actually built into the side of a volcanic hill, its entrance a massive stone archway that seemed to have been carved directly from the rock face. Intricate symbols spiraled around the doorframe, symbols that looked far older than anything she'd encountered in her art history studies. Bjorn hefted her suitcase from the truck bed, his weathered face creased with concern. "You're certain about staying here alone? The nearest neighbor is 15 kilometers away." Emma pulled the ornate key from her pocket, its metal warm despite the frigid air. "I need to understand what my aunt left me. Besides, I don't have anywhere else to go." The admission stung. 3 weeks ago she'd had a marriage, a home, and a future. Now she had only questions and this impossible inheritance from an aunt she'd never known existed. The key slid into the lock with surprising ease, and the heavy wooden door swung open silently. Bjorn muttered something in Icelandic that sounded like a prayer. "The locals, they have stories about this place," he said, setting her bag down just inside the threshold. "Your great-aunt Astrid. She lived here 40 years, but people still whispered she was different. Different how? She knew things, weather patterns weeks in advance, where to find people lost in storms. Some said she could speak to the spirits in the old language." He shifted uncomfortably. Probably just superstition. Emma thanked him and watched his taillights disappear down the winding road before stepping fully inside. The door closed behind her with a soft thud that seemed to echo longer than it should. The interior defied logic. What appeared from outside to be carved into a hillside opened into a spacious, multi-level home that burrowed deep into the earth. Smooth stone walls curved organically, as if the passages had been worn by water rather than carved by tools. Soft light emanated from fixtures that appeared to be made of crystalline formations, casting dancing shadows that made the symbols carved into every surface seem to move. Her footsteps echoed as she explored room after room. A library filled with books in languages she couldn't identify. A kitchen with a massive hearth and copper pots that looked medieval. Bedrooms furnished with heavy wooden furniture that belonged in a museum. But it was the largest chamber that took her breath away. The ceiling soared 3 stories high, supported by natural stone columns. At the center stood a pool of water so still and dark it looked like polished obsidian. Above it, carved into the ceiling, was a massive tree whose branches spread across the entire dome. More of those strange symbols wound through its roots and limbs. Emma approached the pool cautiously. The water was perfectly clear despite its dark appearance, and warm air rose from its surface. At the bottom, she could make out what looked like more carved symbols, glowing with a faint blue light. "You have her eyes." Emma spun around, her heart hammering. A woman stood in the doorway, tall, angular, with silver hair braided down her back and eyes the same unsettling shade of green as Emma's own. She wore a long coat that seemed to shimmer between black and deep blue. "I'm sorry, I didn't hear you come in. Are you a neighbor?" "I'm Emma Hartwell. I inherited this place from Astrid Eriksdotter." "Yes, I know." The woman stepped into the chamber, moving with fluid grace. "I am Sigrid. I was a friend of your great-aunt's." Something about the way she said friend made Emma's skin crawl. "I didn't know she had any living relatives until the lawyers contacted me. I never even heard her name before." Astrid had her reasons for staying hidden, as do we all. Sigrid circled the pool slowly, never taking her eyes off Emma. "Tell me, what do you know of your family history?" "Not much. My grandmother died when I was young, and she never spoke about her family. My mother always said we were from ordinary stock, farmers and shopkeepers." Sigrid laughed, a sound like ice cracking. "Ordinary. Yes, that's what your grandmother would have wanted you to believe. Safer that way." "Safer from what?" "From people like me. From people like them." Sigrid gestured toward the symbols above. "From the responsibility that runs in your bloodline, whether you acknowledge it or not." Emma backed toward the entrance. "I think I should go. This is all very—" "The pool recognized you." Sigrid's voice cut through Emma's rising panic. "Look at it now." Emma glanced down and gasped. The symbols at the bottom of the pool were glowing brighter, pulsing in rhythm with her heartbeat. The water itself seemed to be moving, swirling in slow spirals despite the lack of any current. "Your great-aunt was a guardian," Sigrid continued, "as was your grandmother before her, and her mother before that. The bloodline stretches back over 1,000 years to when your ancestors first learned to read the old magic. Magic isn't real, isn't it?" Sigrid smiled, revealing teeth that seemed too sharp. "Then explain what you're seeing." Luna's breath misted in the frigid air as she descended the spiral staircase, each step echoing through the cavern like a death knell. The crystalline walls pulsed with that otherworldly blue light, casting dancing shadows that seemed to reach for her with ghostly fingers. Behind her, Marcus's heavy footsteps provided an oddly comforting rhythm, though she could feel the tension radiating from him like heat from a furnace. "The temperature's dropping," he murmured, his voice barely above a whisper. "It's got to be 20 below down here." Luna pulled her grandmother's journal closer to her chest, the leather binding surprisingly warm against her palms. The baby kicked, as if sensing her anxiety, and she placed a protective hand over her belly. Whatever lay ahead, she needed answers more than she feared the cold. The staircase ended at a massive archway carved from what looked like black stone, though it shimmered with veins of silver that moved like mercury. Ancient symbols covered every inch of the surface, some matching those in the journal, others completely foreign. As Luna approached, the symbols began to glow, responding to her presence with an intensity that made her skin tingle. "Luna, wait." Marcus caught her arm, his grip gentle but firm. "We don't know what's on the other side." She turned to face him, seeing her own fear reflected in his dark eyes. "My grandmother's journal mentions a threshold guardian, something that tests the worthiness of those who would enter the Nexus. And if we're not worthy?" The question hung between them like a blade. Luna opened the journal, her fingers trembling as she found the passage she'd been reading earlier. Her grandmother's spidery handwriting seemed to writhe in the blue light. "The Guardian sees truth," she read aloud. "It cannot be deceived by words or intentions, only by the deepest nature of one's heart. Those who seek power for selfish gain will find only destruction. Those who come in service to the ancient pact will be granted passage." A sound echoed from beyond the archway, low, rhythmic, like the breathing of some enormous creature. Luna's pulse quickened, but she stepped forward anyway. The symbols flared brighter, and suddenly the archway wasn't empty anymore. A figure materialized in the opening, neither fully solid nor completely translucent. It stood nearly 8 feet tall, draped in robes that seemed woven from starlight and shadow. Where its face should have been, Luna saw only swirling galaxies, ancient and infinite. When it spoke, its voice came from everywhere and nowhere, resonating through her bones. "Blood of the Blackwood line," it intoned. "You have returned to the place of watching, but you do not come alone." Marcus stepped protectively in front of Luna, his hand moving instinctively toward the knife at his belt. The Guardian's attention shifted to him like the focus of a cosmic lens, and Luna felt him stiffen. "Peace, child of the New World," the Guardian continued. "Your intentions are known to me. Your heart carries love, not greed. But love can blind as surely as avarice. Are you prepared to see truth, even if it destroys what you believe?" Luna moved to Marcus's side, her chin raised in defiance despite her terror. "We need to understand what's happening. People are dying, and I think it's connected to this place." The Guardian's robes billowed, though no wind stirred in the cavern. "Death follows when the balance is broken. Your grandmother held the watch for 7 decades, keeping the hungry ones at bay. But her passing has left the door unguarded, and there are those who would claim dominion over powers they cannot comprehend." "What powers?" Marcus demanded. "What is this place really?" The space around them shifted, walls falling away until they stood in what seemed like the heart of creation itself. Stars wheeled overhead, and below them stretched a vast network of crystalline pathways connecting countless worlds. Luna gasped, her hand instinctively protecting her unborn child as vertigo threatened to overwhelm her. "The Nexus," the Guardian explained, its voice now coming from the very air around them, "a crossing point between dimensions, built by the architects when the universe was young. Your bloodline, Luna Blackwood, carries their essence. You are the last of their descendants, charged with preventing catastrophic breach between worlds." "I don't understand," Luna whispered. "I'm just an architect. I design buildings, as did they, child." But their buildings were reality itself. The vision shattered like glass, and they were back in the cavern. The Guardian gestured toward passages that Luna now saw branching off in multiple directions, each carved with different symbols. "Choose your path wisely. The first leads to the Chronicle Chambers, where the history of your charge is preserved. The second leads to the Scrying Pools, where you may glimpse the threats that gather. The third leads directly to the Nexus heart, where great power dwells and great danger." Luna felt the baby kick again, stronger this time, as if urging her forward. She looked at Marcus, saw the question in his eyes, and made her choice. "The Chronicle Chambers," she said firmly. "I need to understand what I've inherited before I can protect it." The Guardian nodded, already beginning to fade. "Remember, child, knowledge is the heaviest burden of all." The carved stone felt warm beneath Emma's fingertips, pulsing with an energy that made her skin tingle. She traced the intricate symbols etched into its surface, each one seeming to shift and dance in her peripheral vision. The chamber had grown silent, except for the steady drip of water somewhere in the darkness beyond the torchlight. "You feel it, don't you?" Kai's voice was barely a whisper behind her. "The awakening." Emma pulled her hand back as if burned. "What is this place? What are these symbols? Your great-grandmother never told you the stories?" He moved closer, his footsteps echoing off the ancient walls. "About why your family left Iceland so suddenly in 1943. She died when I was 12. She barely spoke English, and when she did—" Emma's voice trailed off as a memory surfaced. Her great-grandmother's urgent whispers in broken English, something about keeping secrets buried, about promises made to keep the family safe. The Guardians, Kai continued, have protected this place for over 1,000 years. Each generation one is chosen. Your bloodline carries the mark. Emma turned to face him, anger flaring. Stop speaking in riddles. What guardians? What mark? Instead of answering, Kai reached for her left wrist, the one that had been tingling since she'd entered the house. Before she could pull away, he pushed up her sleeve, revealing the birthmark she'd carried her entire life, a crescent-shaped mark that had always been there, unremarkable until now. In the torchlight, the birthmark glowed with the same pale luminescence as the symbols on the walls. Impossible, Emma breathed, staring at her own skin as if seeing it for the first time. Your great-grandmother was supposed to return, Kai said, his voice heavy with old grief. She was the last guardian. When she fled to America, she broke a chain that had been unbroken for centuries. The chamber suddenly felt smaller, the weight of the earth above pressing down. Emma's heart hammered against her ribs. Guardian of what? Kai gestured toward the carved stone, and Emma noticed for the first time that it wasn't just a wall decoration. It was a seal, covering what looked like an entrance to something deeper. There are things in this world that predate human civilization, powers that were bound and hidden when the first settlers came to this island. Your family has always stood watch. A new voice cut through the chamber's stillness, and now that watch has been abandoned for far too long. Emma spun around to see a woman emerging from the shadows, tall, severe, with silver hair that seemed to catch and hold the torchlight. She wore dark clothing that looked both modern and ancient, and her eyes fixed on Emma with an intensity that made her want to step backward. Dr. Elena Voss, the woman said, though it wasn't clear if she was introducing herself or addressing someone else. I've been looking for you, Emma. I don't know any Dr. Voss, Emma said, but even as the words left her mouth, she felt a strange recognition, as if she'd seen this woman before in dreams. Your husband didn't just steal your money and disappear, Dr. Voss continued, moving closer with predatory grace. He was paid to do it. Paid to ensure you'd be desperate enough to come here, to this place at this particular time. The revelation hit Emma like a physical blow. That's impossible. David is many things, but he's not. He's not what? Not capable of being bought? Not willing to betray you for the right price? Dr. Voss's smile was sharp as broken glass. Men like your husband are useful precisely because their motivations are so simple. Money, escape, a new life far from consequences. Emma looked between Kai and Dr. Voss, her mind reeling. You're saying this was all planned? The divorce, the empty accounts, the inheritance? The inheritance was real enough, Kai said quietly. Your great-grandmother's will was genuine, but there are those who have been waiting decades for a member of your family to return. Waiting for what? Dr. Voss stepped up to the carved stone, her fingers hovering just above its surface. To finish what your great-grandmother started when she opened the seal in 1943. She was trying to relocate what lies beyond, to take it somewhere safe. But the war came, and she had to choose between her duty and her family's survival. She chose family, Kai added. She took your grandfather and fled, leaving the seal partially opened, the guardian posts abandoned. Emma stared at the stone seal, understanding dawning with horrible clarity. What's behind it? Something that certain people would kill to possess, Dr. Voss said, and something that would end civilization as we know it, if it ever got free. The birthmark on Emma's wrist pulsed with warmth, and somewhere in the depths below, something responded with a sound like thunder rolling through stone. The runes on the walls seemed to pulse with an inner light as Emma stepped deeper into the chamber, Magnus close behind her. The air grew colder with each step, and she could see her breath forming small clouds in front of her face. The mysterious woman, who had introduced herself only as Sigrid, moved with fluid grace through the shadows, her pale hair catching what little light filtered down from above. Your grandmother never told you about the bloodstone? Sigrid's voice carried an odd accent, as if she spoke English as a second language learned centuries ago. How very like Astrid to keep the old secrets buried. Emma's throat felt dry. I don't understand any of this. My grandmother died when I was 12. She never mentioned Iceland, never mentioned this place. Sigrid paused beside a carved pillar that stretched from floor to ceiling, her fingers tracing intricate patterns in the stone. Astrid was the last of the guardians before you, child. She fled to America to escape her duties, thinking she could live a normal life. But the bloodline doesn't forget, and neither do those who seek what we protect. Magnus stepped closer to Emma, his hand hovering near the small of her back. She found his presence oddly comforting, despite having known him for less than a day. "What exactly are you guarding?" he asked. The chamber opened into a vast underground hall, supported by dozens of carved pillars. In the center stood a raised platform, and on it sat a pedestal holding something that made Emma's breath catch in her throat. It was a stone the size of a human heart, deep red like crystallized blood, and it seemed to contain its own source of light, a warm, pulsing glow that cast dancing shadows on the walls. "The Vulva Stone," Sigrid whispered, approaching the platform with reverent steps. Forged in the early days when the boundaries between worlds were thin, it holds the power to see across time, past and future alike. Vikings consulted it before great raids. Kings used it to predict the rise and fall of nations, and now, in the wrong hands, it could unravel the very fabric of reality. Emma stared at the stone, feeling something stir deep in her chest, a recognition she couldn't explain. "That's impossible. Stones don't have power. This is just folklore." "Is it?" Sigrid's pale eyes fixed on her. "Then explain why your husband's business partners have spent the last 3 months trying to locate this place. Explain why they hired mercenaries to track down every living descendant of the Guardian bloodline. Explain why they emptied your bank accounts to fund their search." The words hit Emma like a physical blow. "What did you say about Daniel?" Magnus turned sharply. "You think her husband's disappearance is connected to this?" "Connected?" Sigrid laughed, but there was no humor in the sound. "Child, your marriage was orchestrated from the beginning. Daniel Thorne was recruited by the Obsidian Circle specifically to get close to Astrid's granddaughter. They've been watching your family for decades, waiting for the right moment to strike." Emma's legs felt unsteady. The stone's pulsing light seemed to grow brighter, and suddenly she could hear something. Whispers, voices speaking in languages she didn't recognize, but somehow understood. Images flashed through her mind. Her grandmother as a young woman, standing in this very chamber, hooded figures gathering around ancient texts, Daniel laughing with strangers in expensive suits, signing papers while her photograph lay on the table between them. "No," she gasped, pressing her palms against her temples. "This isn't real. This can't be real." "The stone is responding to you," Sigrid said, her voice urgent now. "Your blood recognizes its call, but you must learn to control it before they arrive." "Before who arrives?" Magnus demanded. As if in answer, a distant sound echoed through the tunnels above, the rumble of vehicles, the slam of doors, voices shouting in English with American accents. "The circle," Sigrid breathed. "They've found us." Emma looked up, her vision still swimming with impossible images. "Daniel?" "Leading them, no doubt. He served his purpose as a husband. Now he returns to claim his true prize." Sigrid moved swiftly to the platform, her hands hovering over the stone. "We have minutes, perhaps less. You must choose, Emma Thorne. Accept your birthright and fight, or watch them tear apart the barriers that keep the world sane." The voices above grew closer, and Emma could hear footsteps echoing in the entrance tunnel. Her entire life had been a lie. Her marriage, her sense of security, probably even her father's death years ago. But as she stared at the vulva stone, feeling its ancient power calling to something deep in her blood, she realized that for the first time since Daniel had left, she wasn't afraid. She was angry. "Tell me what I need to do." The morning light filtering through the crystalline windows felt different somehow, charged with an energy that made Maya's skin tingle. She'd barely slept, her mind churning over Ilara's revelation about the prophecy and the growing certainty that her child was somehow central to everything happening in this realm. A soft knock interrupted her restless thoughts. "Come in," she called, expecting to see Ilara's familiar face. Instead, a young woman with silver hair and eyes like storm clouds entered, carrying a tray of what appeared to be breakfast. "I'm Kira," the woman said, her accent carrying musical undertones Maya had never heard before. "Ilara sent me. She's been called to the Council of Ancients." The way she said it made Maya's stomach clench with worry. "Is everything all right?" Kira hesitated, setting the tray down carefully. "There have been developments. The barriers between our realm and the Shadow Realm have weakened further overnight. 3 villages reported sightings of shadow wraiths just before dawn." Maya's hand instinctively moved to her belly. The baby had been unusually active since yesterday, and she wondered if there was a connection. "What does that mean for us?" "It means time is running shorter than we hoped." Kira's expression was grave. "The Council believes the child's presence here is accelerating the convergence. But there's something else, something Ilara discovered in the ancient texts last night." Maya felt her pulse quicken. "What kind of something?" Kira glanced toward the door, then lowered her voice. "The prophecy speaks of a choice the heir must make before birth, a binding that will determine not just their power, but their very nature, light or shadow, creation or destruction." The words sent ice through Maya's veins. How can an unborn child make a choice? "Through the mother," Kira said simply. "The binding responds to the mother's heart, her fears, her hopes. It's why they brought you here, but also why some on the council now question whether it was wise." Before Maya could respond, the air in the room seemed to shimmer, and she felt that familiar pulling sensation in her chest. But this time, instead of the warm golden light she'd experienced before, shadows began seeping through the crystal walls like dark water. Kira gasped and stepped back. This shouldn't be possible. The house's protections should prevent. Her words were cut off as the shadows coalesced into a figure Maya recognized from her nightmares. Tall, draped in darkness that seemed to absorb light, with eyes that burned like dying stars. When it spoke, its voice was like wind through a cemetery. "Child of 2 worlds," it said, and Maya felt the baby kick hard against her ribs. "Do you see now what your presence has wrought? The barriers crumble, the ancient seals weaken, all because they would place their hopes in an unborn heir." Maya tried to move but found herself frozen, not by fear but by some invisible force. Beside her, Kira was similarly paralyzed, her eyes wide with terror. "You offer destruction disguised as destiny," Maya managed to say, surprised by the steadiness of her own voice. "I've seen what your realm brings." The shadow figure laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "Have you? Or have you seen only what they wish you to see? Tell me, child, in your world above, were you not betrayed, cast aside, made to feel worthless?" Each word hit like a physical blow. "We offer no false promises of destiny. We offer power, control, the ability to shape your own fate." The shadows around the figure began to pulse, and Maya felt something responding inside her, not the baby, but something deeper, darker. Her own anger at David's betrayal, her fear of being alone, her resentment at being dragged into a destiny she never chose. "You feel it, don't you?" The shadow continued. "That rage, that desire for control. These people would make you a vessel for their prophecy. We would make you a queen." For a moment, Maya felt the terrible temptation of it. The promise of never being vulnerable again, never being at the mercy of others' choices. But then the baby moved again, a gentle flutter this time, and she remembered Ilara's words about love being the strongest magic. "No," she said, and the words seemed to carry physical weight, pushing back against the encroaching darkness. "I choose love over control, hope over certainty. I choose to trust." The shadow figure hissed, its form beginning to waver. "Foolish child, You cannot escape choice forever. When the binding comes, remember, power offered freely is better than destiny imposed. With that, it dissolved, taking the shadows with it. The room flooded with normal light again, leaving Maya and Kira gasping as if they'd been underwater. "How did you do that?" Kira whispered. "How did you make it retreat?" Maya sank into a chair, her hands shaking. "I don't know, I just chose." But even as she said it, she wondered if the shadow figure was right about one thing. Was she truly choosing her destiny, or simply accepting one others had written for her? Emma pressed her back against the cold stone wall, her breath coming in sharp bursts as footsteps echoed through the underground corridors above. Magnus had vanished into the shadows the moment they'd heard the intruders enter through the main passage, leaving her alone, with instructions to stay hidden until he returned. The ancient runes carved into the wall behind her seemed to pulse with a faint luminescence, responding to her fear. She'd noticed this phenomenon several times now, the house reacting to her emotions as if it were a living thing. The realization should have terrified her, but instead it felt oddly comforting, like a protective embrace from something that understood her in ways no human ever had. Voices drifted down from somewhere above, speaking in what sounded like Icelandic, mixed with something older, more guttural. Emma couldn't make out the words, but the tone was unmistakably hostile. These weren't lost tourists who'd stumbled upon the hidden entrance. She thought about the journal pages Magnus had shown her earlier, filled with her grandmother's spidery handwriting describing rituals and guardianships that stretched back centuries. The Keeper's bloodline, she'd called it. Emma still couldn't fully grasp what that meant, but the weight of responsibility was settling on her shoulders like a heavy cloak. A sound made her freeze, footsteps on the spiral staircase leading to this lower level. Slow, deliberate steps that spoke of someone who knew exactly where they were going. Emma's hand instinctively moved to the strange pendant Magnus had given her, its surface warm against her palm despite the underground chill. The pendant began to vibrate softly, and suddenly Emma could sense something else in the darkness, a presence that felt ancient and vast, like standing at the edge of an ocean. The house's secret, whatever it was, lay deeper still. She could feel it calling to her, tugging at something in her blood that recognized its summons. Light flickered around the corner, casting dancing shadows on the tunnel walls. Emma held her breath as a figure emerged, a tall woman with silver hair braided with dark ribbons, carrying an ornate torch that burned with an unnatural blue flame. The woman's eyes swept the corridor methodically, and Emma pressed herself deeper into the alcove, praying the shadows would hide her. "I know you're here," the woman called softly, her English accented with something Emma couldn't place. "The house sings with your presence, little keeper. There's no point in hiding from what you are." Emma's heart hammered against her ribs. How could this stranger know about the keeper's role? Magnus had made it sound like the knowledge was closely guarded, passed down through specific bloodlines. "Your grandmother was stubborn too," the woman continued, moving closer. She thought she could protect the old ways by hiding them away. But some secrets are too powerful to remain buried forever. The pendant grew warmer, almost hot now, and Emma felt a strange tingling in her fingertips. The runes on the wall behind her were glowing brighter, responding to her proximity and rising panic. She needed to move, to find Magnus or another way out, but her legs felt frozen. "The consortium has been patient," the woman said, now close enough that Emma could see the intricate tattoos covering her exposed arms, symbols that matched some of the carvings throughout the house. "But patience has its limits. The world above is changing, and we need what sleeps beneath this place." A new sound echoed through the tunnels, a low, thrumming note that seemed to come from the very foundations of the underground structure. The woman stopped abruptly, her confident demeanor flickering with what looked like uncertainty. "Impossible," she whispered. "It's too early. The moon phase isn't right." Emma felt the vibration through the soles of her feet, a rhythm that matched her heartbeat. The pendant was burning hot now, and she realized with a mixture of terror and wonder that she was somehow connected to whatever was making that sound. The woman spun toward Emma's hiding place, her eyes wide with a mixture of fear and hunger. "You've awakened it, haven't you? Untrained, uninitiated, and you've already formed the bond." Before Emma could process what that meant, Magnus appeared behind the woman like a shadow-given form. There was something different about him now, his movements too fluid, his eyes reflecting the blue torchlight like an animal's. "You were warned not to come here, Astrid," he said, his voice carrying harmonics that made the tunnel walls resonate. The woman, Astrid, raised her torch defensively. "The old agreements are void, Magnus. The world has moved beyond your quaint guardianship. We need the power source, and we'll take it with or without the girl's cooperation." Emma stepped out of the shadows, surprising herself with her own boldness. The thrumming sound grew louder, and she could feel something vast stirring in the depths below, responding to her presence like a key turning in an ancient lock. The ancient chamber stretched before them, its walls carved with symbols that seemed to pulse with their own inner light. Emma's breath caught as she stepped across the threshold, feeling the weight of centuries pressing down upon her. The air itself felt different here, thicker, charged with an energy that made her skin tingle. Bjorn's flashlight beams swept across intricate murals, depicting figures with elongated limbs and ethereal faces, their hands raised towards spiraling patterns that hurt to look at directly. "I've never seen anything like this," he whispered, his voice barely audible in the vast space. "Gateways to what?" Emma asked, though part of her wasn't sure she wanted to know the answer. Before Magnus could respond, a sound echoed from somewhere in the darkness ahead, a low, melodic humming that seemed to come from the walls themselves. Emma's pendant grew warm against her chest, and she noticed the symbols on the walls beginning to glow brighter in response. "We should go back," Bjorn said, backing toward the entrance. "This feels wrong." But Emma found herself drawn deeper into the chamber. The humming grew louder, and she realized it wasn't coming from the walls at all. It was coming from her, or rather through her. The melody flowed from her lips without conscious thought, notes in a language she'd never learned but somehow understood. Magnus spun around, his eyes wide. "How do you know that song?" Emma stopped humming abruptly, startled by the question. "I don't know. It just came to me." "That's the calling," Magnus said, his voice tight with a mixture of awe and fear. "The song that opens the way. My grandmother said only those with the true bloodline could—" His words were cut off by a grinding sound as a section of the far wall began to shift and slide inward, revealing another passage beyond. The humming Emma had been producing now seemed to come from the passage itself, beckoning them forward. "The bloodline," Emma repeated, pieces of a puzzle she didn't understand beginning to fall into place. "Magnus, what exactly did your grandmother tell you about my family?" He hesitated, glancing between her and the newly opened passage. "She said the Thornfield line were guardians, that they were tasked with protecting something ancient and powerful, something that could change the world or destroy it." Emma thought of her grandmother's journal, of the cryptic references to responsibilities and burdens passed down through generations. "And my husband knew this?" "More than knew," Magnus said grimly. "He was working for people who've been searching for this place for decades. They call themselves the Restoration Council, but they're nothing more than treasure hunters drunk on promises of power." A chill ran down Emma's spine. "How long have you known?" "Since the day you arrived. I've been watching this house for 3 years, waiting for someone from your family to return. When David contacted me about selling the property," he shrugged, "I realized he had no idea what he was trying to sell." Bjorn's flashlight flickered, casting dancing shadows on the walls. "We need to leave, now. Whatever this is, it's not meant for us." But even as he spoke, they heard footsteps echoing from the main chamber above, voices calling out in accented English. Emma's heart hammered as she recognized one of them, her husband's voice, though she'd hoped never to hear it again. "They found us," Magnus hissed. "The entrance must have triggered something when you sang the calling." Emma looked at the passage ahead, then back toward the chamber entrance where David's voice was growing closer. The pendant around her neck pulsed with warm light, and she felt that strange certainty again. the same feeling that had led her to the hidden door. "This way," she said, heading toward the newly opened passage. "Emma, no," Bjorn protested. "We don't know what's down there." "But I do," she said, surprising herself with the conviction in her voice. "I can feel it. This is why I'm here, why my grandmother left me this place." The voices above grew louder, more urgent. She could hear them descending the spiral staircase, their footsteps echoing off stone walls. "They can't have all of us," Magnus said grimly, pulling a knife from his belt. "I'll hold them off. You two go ahead." "No," Emma said firmly. "We go together or not at all." The humming sound from the passage grew more insistent, and the symbols on the walls blazed brighter. Emma felt something awakening in her blood, a memory that wasn't quite her own. Her ancestors had walked this path before. They had faced this choice. "Whatever my family was guarding," she said, looking at both men, "it's down there, and I think it's time I met it." Footsteps above thundered closer as Emma stepped into the glowing passage, her companions reluctantly following her toward whatever ancient secret lay waiting in the depths. The ancient chamber stretched before them, its walls carved with symbols that seemed to pulse with their own inner light. Emma's breath caught as she stepped across the threshold, the cold stone beneath her feet radiating an energy that made her skin tingle. The air itself felt different here, thicker, charged with possibilities that her rational mind couldn't quite grasp. "Codex Vitae," Astrid whispered, her voice reverent. "Your great-grandmother wasn't just its keeper, Emma. She was its chosen guardian." The book lay open on a pedestal at the chamber's center, its pages filled with flowing script that shifted and changed even as Emma watched. The text appeared to be written in multiple languages, some she recognized, others completely foreign. But somehow, impossibly, she found she could understand fragments of it. "Life essence manipulation," she read aloud, the words coming unbidden to her lips. "The art of drawing vitality from one source and transferring it to another." Magnus stepped closer, his scarred face grim. "Your family has protected this knowledge for centuries, the ability to extend life, to heal the unhealable. It's what the Order has been seeking all along." Emma's mind reeled. "That's why those men came after us? For this book?" "The Order of the Crimson Veil has hunted the Codex for over 500 years, Astrid explained. "They believe they can use its power to achieve immortality, but they don't understand the cost. Every life extended requires another to be shortened. Every healing demands a sacrifice." The symbols on the wall seemed to respond to their conversation, glowing brighter as if awakened by the discussion of their secrets. Emma noticed that some of the carvings depicted scenes, figures performing rituals, hands glowing with ethereal light, life forces flowing like luminous rivers between bodies. "My great-grandmother," Emma said slowly, pieces of the puzzle falling into place. "She lived to be 97, didn't she? But she looked decades younger in the photographs I found." Astrid nodded solemnly. Sigrid learned to use the Codex's teachings, but she was selective. She only took what she needed to survive long enough to find the next guardian. Small amounts of life force, freely given by those she healed in return. "But the Order wants more than that," Magnus added. "They seek complete immortality, no matter how many must die to achieve it." Emma approached the pedestal cautiously, drawn by an inexplicable pull. As she neared the book, the text on its pages shifted more rapidly, as if responding to her presence. The leather binding was warm to the touch, and she could swear she felt a pulse beneath her fingertips, a heartbeat that matched her own. "There's something else," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I've been having dreams, visions of places I've never been, people I've never met. They started right after David left, but they've gotten stronger since I arrived in Iceland." Astrid and Magnus exchanged a meaningful look. "The awakening," Astrid murmured. "It's beginning." "What awakening?" Emma demanded, but before either could answer, a distant rumbling echoed through the tunnels behind them. The sound of heavy footsteps and voices carried down the stone corridors. "They've found us," Magnus said grimly, his hand moving to the knife at his belt. The Order's hunters must have tracked us here. Astrid moved quickly to a section of the chamber wall, pressing her palm against a particular symbol. A hidden panel slid away, revealing a narrow passage. There's another way out, but you'll have to take the codex with you. I can't just steal it, Emma protested. You're not stealing it, Astrid replied urgently. It's yours by right, your bloodline, your inheritance, your responsibility. Sigrid prepared for this moment her entire life. The footsteps were getting closer now, accompanied by the scrape of metal on stone. Emma could hear voices speaking in hushed tones, coordinating their approach. Her heart pounded as she realized these weren't mere thieves or treasure hunters. These were people who had killed for what lay in this chamber. With trembling hands, she carefully lifted the codex from its resting place. The moment her fingers fully closed around it, a shock of energy coursed through her body. Images flooded her mind. Generations of women who had carried this burden, protected this knowledge, paid the price for its power. She saw Sigrid as a young woman accepting the codex from her own grandmother. She witnessed the terrible choices each guardian had faced, the sacrifices they had made. "Emma!" Magnus's sharp whisper cut through her visions. "We have to go. Now." She clutched the ancient book to her chest and followed Astrid toward the hidden passage. As they slipped into the narrow tunnel, Emma caught a glimpse of shadowy figures entering the chamber behind them, their faces hidden beneath dark hoods. One of them called out in accented English, his voice cold and commanding. "The Guardian cannot run forever. The Codex belongs to those with the will to use its full power." The passage door sealed shut behind them with a grinding whisper, but Emma knew their escape was only temporary. She was no longer just a woman fleeing a broken marriage. She was now the keeper of an ancient secret that others would kill to possess. The ancient chamber beneath the round house thrummed with an energy that made Maya's teeth ache. She pressed her palm against her swollen belly, feeling the baby respond with a sharp kick that seemed to echo the rhythm of the pulsing walls around her. The crystalline formations embedded in the stone glowed brighter with each step she took toward the center of the room, where a pedestal held what could only be the heart of Ada. It wasn't what she had expected. Instead of a jewel or crown, the artifact appeared to be a sphere of living starlight, no larger than her fist, suspended in mid-air above the carved stone platform. Whispers in languages she didn't recognize filled the air, and she caught fragments of meaning that bypassed her ears entirely, speaking directly to something deep within her consciousness. "The convergence accelerates," Elrond's voice came from behind her, heavy with centuries of weariness. "Can you feel it? The barriers between worlds grow thin." Maya nodded, unable to speak. She could feel it, a stretching sensation, as if reality itself was being pulled taut. Through the walls of the chamber, she sensed the presence of both worlds pressing against each other, like soap bubbles about to merge. The baby kicked again, harder this time, and she gasped. "She knows," whispered a voice that seemed to come from the heart itself. Maya spun around, but saw only Elrond's concerned face and the empty chamber beyond. "Who said that?" she demanded. "The child," Elrond replied softly. "She speaks through the connection you share. The blood of the Guardians runs strong in her veins." A chill ran down Maya's spine. "You're saying my daughter can communicate with that thing?" "Not a thing," came the whisper again, clearer now. "A keeper of memory. A bridge between what was and what must be." The heart pulsed brighter, and suddenly Maya's vision exploded with images. She saw her grandmother as a young woman, standing in this very chamber with tears streaming down her face as she made some terrible choice. She saw armies of shadow pouring across a vast plain while dragons wheeled overhead. She saw the roundhouse in Iceland, but it was different, newer, and surrounded by others like it, forming a perfect circle around a pool of starlight. The other houses, Maya gasped, understanding flooding through her. There were more. 7 in total, Elrond confirmed. Your grandmother's was the last. The others fell when their guardians failed to maintain the balance. Another wave of visions crashed over her. She saw what would happen if the worlds fully merged. cities crumbling as forests of malorn trees erupted through concrete, office buildings twisted into impossible spirals by the influence of elven magic, humans fleeing in terror from creatures they couldn't understand. But she also saw the alternative, both worlds slowly dying, starved of the energy that flowed between them, until nothing remained but empty shells. "There has to be another way," she said desperately. "Some middle path." "There is," the whisper came again, and this time Maya realized it wasn't coming from the heart. It was coming from her own unborn daughter, but it requires sacrifice. Footsteps echoed from the tunnel leading to the chamber. Maya turned to see a figure emerging from the shadows, and her heart stopped. It was David, her ex, but something was wrong with him. His movements were too fluid, too graceful, and his eyes held a light that was definitely not human. "Hello, Maya," he said, and his voice carried harmonics that made the crystals in the walls ring like bells. "I've been looking for you." "That's not David," Elrond said, his hand moving to where a sword should hang at his side. "No," the thing wearing David's face agreed pleasantly. "Though I did borrow his memories to make this meeting more comfortable, I am what your people might call a messenger. I represent certain interests that would prefer the worlds remain separate." "The Valar," Maya breathed, remembering the stories her grandmother had told her. "Among others, the merger you're considering would upset balances that have stood since the world was young. Surely you can see the wisdom in maintaining the status quo?" The baby kicked violently, and pain shot through Maya's abdomen. She doubled over, gasping, and when she looked up, the chamber had changed. The walls were cracked, letting in streams of aurora light from the world above. Through the fissures, she could see glimpses of both realities, the barren beauty of Iceland and the timeless forests of Middle-earth, pressing against each other with increasing urgency. "Choose quickly," the false David said, stepping closer, "before the choice is taken from you entirely." Maya straightened, one hand on her belly, the other reaching toward the heart of Arda. The moment her fingers made contact with the living starlight, the whisper became a voice, clear and strong and undeniably her daughter's. "Now, Mama. Do it now." The chamber filled with blinding light as Maya closed her fist around the heart and felt the fate of two worlds flow through her veins. The ancient stone beneath Emma's feet thrummed with an energy that made her teeth ache. Magnus stood rigid beside her, his face pale in the ethereal light emanating from the chamber walls. The crystalline formations that had seemed merely decorative moments before now pulsed with deliberate rhythm, like a massive heartbeat deep within the earth. "The covenant is breaking," Astrid whispered, her voice carrying an edge of something Emma had never heard before, fear. After 800 years, the barriers are finally weakening. Emma pressed her palm against the nearest crystal, gasping as visions flooded her mind. She saw her ancestors, generation after generation, each taking their turn as guardians, women who looked like her, who shared her stubborn jaw and determined eyes, all bound to this place by blood and duty. But there was something else in the visions, something that made her stomach clench with dread. "What exactly are we keeping contained?" Emma asked, though part of her already suspected the answer would change everything. Magnus moved to an ornate stone panel covered in runes that seemed to shift and writhe in the crystal light. "Your family didn't just guard treasures, Emma, they guarded a prison." The temperature in the chamber dropped noticeably, and Emma's breath began to mist. Through the translucent walls, shadows moved, shapes too large and too fluid to be human. She thought of the creature she'd glimpsed in her peripheral vision during her first nights in the house, the sense of being watched, the dreams that felt more like memories. "The Jotuns," Astrid said simply, "the old ones who ruled before humans learned to make fire. Your bloodline has been the lock on their cage since the 13th century. Emma's legs nearly gave out. She'd inherited more than a house. She'd inherited a responsibility that stretched back centuries. But why me? I don't know anything about this world. I can barely handle my normal life, let alone— "Because it has to be you," Magnus interrupted, his finger tracing a particular sequence of runes. The magic is tied to your DNA, your family's essence. No one else can renew the covenant. A sound like grinding stone echoed through the chamber, and hairline cracks appeared in the crystal walls. Through the fissures, Emma glimpsed something that made her mind struggle to process what she was seeing. Eyes, massive, ancient eyes, filled with malevolent intelligence, studying her with the patience of something that had waited centuries for this moment. "How long do we have?" she asked, surprised by how steady her voice sounded. "Hours, maybe less," Astrid replied, consulting a device that looked like a compass crossed with an astrolabe. "The winter solstice amplifies everything. It's why your husband's allies chose now to strike." Emma's blood turned to ice water. "Michael is involved in this?" "Not directly," Magnus said, still working at the rune panel. "But the people who hired him to steal your inheritance, they knew exactly what they were doing. They needed you financially desperate, emotionally broken, willing to sell this property without asking too many questions." The pieces clicked into place with sickening clarity. The perfectly timed affair, the emptied bank accounts, the mysterious buyer who'd been so eager to purchase the Icelandic property sight unseen. She'd been manipulated from the very beginning, her entire life orchestrated to bring her to this moment of choice. "The renewal ritual," she said, not really asking. "What does it require?" Astrid and Magnus exchanged a look that told Emma everything she needed to know. "Blood," Astrid said quietly. "Your blood, freely given. But Emma, there's something else you need to understand. The ritual doesn't just renew the prison, it ties you to this place permanently. You become part of the covenant, part of the barrier itself. I'd never be able to leave." "No," Magnus confirmed. "You'd become like us, sustained by the magic, bound to guard against what sleeps below." Another crack appeared in the crystal wall, wider this time. Through the gap, Emma could see movement in the darkness beyond, something vast and patient stirring to wakefulness. The air itself seemed to thicken with malice, and she felt the weight of countless hungry gazes fixed upon her. She thought of her old life, the job she'd lost, the friends who'd stopped calling after the divorce, the empty apartment waiting for her back home. Then she thought of Magnus, of the connection that had sparked between them, of Astrid, who'd become more of a family than Emma had known in years. She thought of all the people in the world above who had no idea what horrors waited beneath their feet. The choice wasn't really a choice at all. "Show me what I need to do," Emma said, rolling up her sleeves. The ancient stones sang with approval, and somewhere in the darkness below, something that had waited 8 centuries for freedom let out a roar of frustrated rage. The final act was about to begin. The ancient chamber thrummed with an energy that made Emma's teeth ache. The crystalline formations embedded in the walls pulsed with a rhythm that seemed to match her heartbeat, casting shifting patterns of blue-white light across Magnus's weathered face as he approached the central dais. "Your grandmother knew this day would come," he said, his voice barely audible above the humming that filled the air. "She prepared for it, even as she hoped it would never be necessary." Emma's fingers tightened around the leather journal she'd found in Astrid's study. The pages were filled with her grandmother's careful handwriting, spells, warnings, and detailed instructions she was only beginning to understand. "The covenant is breaking down, isn't it? That's what all of this means." Magnus nodded grimly. "The barriers between worlds grow thin. Without a guardian to maintain the balance, the old powers will spill through. What happened to Dr. Eriksson is just the beginning." A chill ran down Emma's spine as she remembered the archaeologist's twisted body, drained of life by forces he'd never understood. She thought of his team, scattered to the winds after witnessing something that defied explanation. How many others would suffer if she failed? "I don't know how to do this," she whispered, staring at the complex diagram carved into the stone floor. Symbols she was only learning to recognize spiraled outward from a central point where her grandmother's staff lay waiting. "I've been here less than a week. Astrid spent decades preparing. She also spent decades choosing you." Magnus moved to one of the wall panels, pressing his palm against a specific sequence of crystals. The chamber responded with a deep, resonant tone that seemed to come from the earth itself. Your bloodline carries the gift, but more than that, you have the strength to bear what comes next. Emma opened the journal again, scanning the passage she'd read a dozen times. The ritual seemed straightforward enough in theory, but the warnings scattered throughout Astrid's notes were terrifying. The Guardian must be willing to sacrifice everything, one entry read. The power demands absolute commitment. There can be no turning back. What exactly am I sacrificing? She asked, though part of her already knew the answer. Magnus was quiet for a long moment, his ancient eyes reflecting the crystal light. Your old life, your human limitations. Once you accept the mantle, you become something more and something less. The Guardian exists between worlds, bound to this place and its purpose. The weight of it pressed down on her like the tons of earth and ice above. She thought of her life in Boston, already shattered by David's betrayal. There was nothing left for her there, no home, no career, no future she recognized. But choosing this path meant accepting that she could never return to any semblance of normal existence. A tremor ran through the chamber, violent enough to send small rocks cascading from the ceiling. The crystal formations flickered, their light dimming momentarily before blazing back to life. They're trying to break through, Magnus said, urgency creeping into his voice. The ones who killed your grandmother. They know the barriers are weakest now, during the transition. Emma felt it too. A pressure at the edges of her consciousness, like something vast and hungry testing the boundaries of reality. The house above groaned under forces that had nothing to do with the Iceland wind. She moved toward the dais, her grandmother's journal clutched against her chest. The staff seemed to pulse with its own inner light as she approached, calling to something deep in her blood. When her fingers closed around the smooth wood, the sensation was like completing an electric circuit. Power flowed through her, alien and familiar at the same time. The words, Magnus urged, speak the binding words before they find a way through. Emma's voice shook as she began to recite the ancient phrases from the journal. The language felt strange on her tongue, syllables that seemed to reshape themselves as she spoke them. The air in the chamber grew thick, charged with potential. Crystal formations responded to her voice, their light intensifying until the entire space blazed like the heart of a star. Emma felt herself changing, her awareness expanding beyond the confines of flesh and bone. She could sense the invisible threads that held the worlds apart, could feel where they strained and threatened to snap. Power coursed through her, more than any human body should be able to contain. She understood now why Astrid had seemed so otherworldly in her final years, why she'd always felt like she was looking at something just beyond the visible world. The Guardian existed in multiple dimensions simultaneously, a living anchor point between realities. As the ritual reached its crescendo, Emma felt her old self slipping away like a shed skin. Emma the abandoned wife, Emma the victim, those versions of herself burned away in the crucible of transformation. What emerged was something new, something necessary. The ancient covenant renewed itself through her will, and the hungry darkness pressing against reality's borders retreated, for now. But even as power settled into her bones like molten gold, Emma knew this was only the beginning. The ancient chamber trembled as Luna pressed her palm against the obsidian altar, her pregnancy adding weight to her every movement. The portal stone pulsed beneath her touch, responding to bloodline magic that had coursed through Blackwood women for generations. Around her, the underground realm writhed in chaos, Malcolm's corrupted creatures shrieking as they dissolved back into shadow, their stolen essence returning to the earth. "You can't hold it forever," Malcolm's voice echoed from somewhere in the crystalline passages above. His physical form had been banished, but his presence lingered like smoke in the sacred spaces. "The baby will drain you. You'll weaken and I'll be waiting." Luna gritted her teeth, feeling the portal's energy surge through her body. The child in her womb seemed to respond to the ancient magic, kicking with unusual strength. Through her connection to the realm, she sensed every creature, every plant, every stream of water flowing through the hidden world her family had protected. All of it was healing, but slowly. Thomas appeared at her shoulder, his face pale but determined. "The northern passages are clear. Your grandmother's barriers are reforming, but there's still a breach near the old mining tunnels." "Malcolm's escape route," Luna whispered, her eyes still closed as she maintained contact with the altar. "He planned this for years, didn't he? Studied every weakness in grandmother's defenses." Dr. Sarah Chen emerged from behind a cluster of luminescent fungi, her scientific equipment abandoned in favor of an ornate staff she'd found among Grandmother Vera's belongings. "The energy readings are stabilizing, but Luna, your vitals are concerning. Your blood pressure is spiking and the magical drain on your system—" "I'm fine," Luna cut her off, though sweat beaded on her forehead. The truth was, she could feel herself weakening. Each pulse of healing energy she sent through the realm took something from her, and the baby seemed to be fighting the magical currents flowing through her body. Suddenly, the air shimmered near the chamber's entrance. Grandmother Vera materialized, her spirit form more solid than before, her expression grave. "Luna, child, you must listen carefully. What I'm about to tell you will be difficult to hear." Luna's eyes snapped open, though she kept her palm pressed to the altar. "Grandmother, the realm is healing. I can feel it responding." "Yes, but at what cost?" Vera glided closer, her ghostly form emanating ancient sorrow. "There's something about our family's bond to this place that I never told you, something I hoped you'd never need to know." Thomas stepped protectively closer to Luna. "What are you talking about?" Vera's spirit flickered, as if struggling to maintain coherence. "The Blackwood bloodline doesn't just guard this realm, we're bound to it. When a guardian dies while the realm is under threat, her essence becomes part of its defenses. I thought my death would be enough to strengthen the barriers permanently, but Malcolm's corruption runs deeper than I imagined." "What are you saying?" Luna's voice was barely a whisper. "The realm needs a permanent guardian, one who can maintain the barriers from within, someone young enough, strong enough, and magically connected enough to sustain it for generations." Vera's eyes fixed on Luna's pregnant belly. "Your child, Luna. The baby you carry has the strongest connection to this place I've ever sensed." Horror washed over Luna's features. "No, I won't sacrifice my child to this place." "Not sacrifice," Vera said urgently. "Transform. The child could become the realm's living heart, immortal, powerful enough to keep the barriers strong forever, but it would mean giving up a human life." Dr. Chen stepped forward, her medical instincts overriding her awe at conversing with a ghost. "That's monstrous. Luna is 8 months pregnant. The stress alone could kill both of them." The chamber shuddered again, and through their mystical connection, Luna felt Malcolm's presence growing stronger. He was regathering his power, drawing on corruption he'd seeded throughout the realm over decades of careful planning. "There has to be another way," Thomas said desperately. "Some other solution." Luna felt the baby kick again, and this time, impossibly, she sensed something like awareness in the movement. Through the portal's energy, she felt her child's consciousness, ancient beyond its months of existence, touched by the same magic that flowed through the realm. "The choice isn't mine to make," she whispered, understanding flooding through her. "It's the baby's." As if responding to her words, the child moved again, and Luna gasped as visions flooded her mind. Not her own memories, but her child's predetermined purpose. The baby had been conceived in this place, gestated while Luna lived above the portal, shaped by energies that predated human civilization. "She's been preparing for this," Luna breathed, tears streaming down her face. "My daughter. She's been choosing this destiny all along." The portal stone flared with brilliant light, and Luna knew that the final confrontation with Malcolm was coming. But now she understood what it would truly cost, and what her child was willing to sacrifice to save both worlds. Maya's hands trembled as she pressed them against the crystalline walls of the time chamber, feeling the cold energy pulse beneath her palms. The revelation about her great-aunt Ilara's sacrifice had left her reeling, but now she understood why she'd been drawn here, why the house had called to her across generations. "The preservation spell is weakening," she whispered, watching hairline cracks spider across the chamber's surface. "After all these years, it's finally breaking down." Through the translucent barrier, she could see Ilara's perfectly preserved form, hands still raised in the final gesture of the spell that had saved their bloodline's future. Her great-aunt looked impossibly young, frozen at the moment she'd chosen duty over her own life. Maya closed her eyes and reached out with the strange new awareness that had been growing inside her since arriving at the house. The magical currents that flowed through this place weren't random. They followed patterns, ancient pathways carved by generations of her family's power. She could feel them all now, like voices in a vast choir spanning centuries. Her grandmother's essence still lingered in the kitchen where she'd baked bread that could heal heartache. Her great-great-grandmother's presence wrapped around the garden, where flowers bloomed out of season and herbs grew with supernatural vitality. And threading through it all was Ilara's sacrifice, the spell that had kept their legacy alive when everything else seemed lost. "I know what I have to do," Maya said aloud, her voice steady despite the magnitude of what lay ahead. She walked to the ancient desk where Ilara's journal lay open, its pages filled with careful diagrams and flowing script. The final entry described the completion of the preservation spell, but Maya's enhanced perception let her read between the lines. Ilara hadn't just preserved the house, she'd created a bridge across time, a way for future generations to inherit not just magical ability, but the accumulated wisdom of all who came before. The baby stirred in her womb, and Maya felt a sudden clarity. This wasn't just about her anymore, or even about honoring her family's past. Her child would be born into a world where their bloodline's gifts could flourish again, where the old knowledge could take root in new ground. Maya began to speak the words of release, ancient syllables that felt natural on her tongue despite being entirely foreign moments before. As her voice rose, the cracks in the time chamber spread faster, light bleeding through the fractures like golden blood. The house shuddered around her, decades of suspended time rushing back into the world. Dust motes danced in suddenly moving air, and Maya could hear the settling groans of wood and stone accepting the passage of years. But instead of decay, she sensed renewal, the magical foundations of the house drinking in the released energy, growing stronger. The chamber wall dissolved in a cascade of sparkling fragments, and suddenly Maya was face to face with her great-aunt. For one impossible moment, Ilara's eyes opened, focusing on Maya with perfect clarity despite the decades between them. "You came," Ilara whispered, her voice like wind through pine trees. "I felt you in my dreams, saw the child you carry. Our line continues." Maya reached out instinctively, catching Ilara's hands as her great-aunt's body began to shimmer and fade. But instead of loss, Maya felt a profound connection, knowledge and power flowing between them like water finding its level. "The gift is yours now," Ilara continued, her form becoming translucent, "all of ours. Use it wisely as we tried to do. Protect what matters. Create beauty where there was none." Images flashed through Maya's mind, her great-aunt's memories overlaying her own. She saw how to coax reluctant gardens into bloom, how to weave healing into ordinary tasks, how to sense the hidden currents that connected all living things. But more than that, she understood the responsibility that came with such power. Ilara smiled, the expression radiant even as she faded. "Tell her about us," she said, pressing one ghostly hand to Maya's belly. "Tell her she's never truly alone." And then she was gone, dissolving into motes of golden light that swirled around Maya before sinking into the walls, the floor, the very air of the house. The space where the time chamber had stood was now simply another room, but Maya could feel the difference in the house's heartbeat. It was fully alive again, ready to shelter new generations. Maya sank into the chair at Ilara's desk, overwhelmed by the magnitude of what had just occurred. She was no longer just an abandoned wife fleeing a broken marriage. She was the inheritor of centuries of accumulated wisdom, the guardian of gifts that could shape the world around her. Outside, the first hints of dawn were painting the Alaskan sky in shades of rose and gold. Maya placed her hands on her belly, feeling her daughter's strong heartbeat beneath her palms. Soon, they would leave this place and begin building a new life. But they would never really leave. The house would wait for them, as it had waited for her. Maya stood at the threshold between worlds, her daughter sleeping peacefully in the sling across her chest. The aurora borealis danced overhead through the roundhouse's open ceiling, casting ethereal green light across both the Icelandic landscape behind her and the rolling hills of Middle-earth ahead. The Silmaril in her hand pulsed with warm starlight, responding to her heartbeat. "The choice is yours alone," Elrond said softly, his ancient eyes filled with understanding. "You have fulfilled your grandmother's covenant. The treasure is safe. The shadow has been turned back. You may return to your world and live as mortals do." Maya touched the sleeping baby's head, feeling the impossibly soft hair beneath her fingertips. Lily had been born between worlds, touched by starlight and earthlight alike. Her daughter's very existence had somehow stabilized the portal, allowing the free passage that had been growing more difficult with each passing year. "But if I stay?" Maya asked, though she already sensed the answer. "Then you become something new," Gandalf replied, his staff glowing softly in the mystical light. "Guardian eternal, keeper of the ways between worlds. Your daughter will grow up knowing both realms as home." Maya thought of her cramped apartment in Reykjavik, the stack of unpaid bills, the job at the fish processing plant that barely paid enough to survive. She thought of Marcus, who had texted exactly once since she'd discovered the roundhouse, asking if she'd figured out her situation yet. That life felt like a half-remembered dream now, grey and small compared to the vastness spreading before her. Yet she also thought of coffee shops and internet connections, of her mother's worried phone calls, of the ordinary human world where children grew up to become teachers and engineers instead of guardians of ancient treasures. What would it mean for Lily? Maya asked. Growing up between worlds? Elrond smiled, and for a moment his ageless face showed something almost grandfatherly. She would be the first of her kind. A bridge builder, perhaps, one who could help heal the growing divide between the magical and mundane. The Silmaril's light suddenly intensified, and Maya gasped as visions flooded her mind. She saw herself years older, teaching Lily to speak with the northern lights, showing her how to read the language written in Aurora. She saw her daughter as a young woman, traveling freely between realms, carrying messages and gifts, helping lost souls find their way home to whichever world called to them. But she also saw darker possibilities. Lily struggling with belonging nowhere fully, forever caught between two ways of being. The responsibility felt crushing. "Your grandmother faced this same choice once," Gandalf said gently. "She chose to guard the portal from your world, to live mostly human, but the magic never left her completely." "Is that why she seemed so strange to everyone else?" Maya asked, remembering her grandmother's odd conversations with empty air, her uncanny ability to know things before they happened. "She was homesick," Elrond explained. "Torn between duty and desire. You need not repeat her sacrifice. The portal is stable now, thanks to Lily. You could move freely between both worlds." Maya closed her eyes and felt the wind from both realms mixing around her. The cold, salt-tinged air of Iceland carried scents of fish and volcanic rock. The warm breeze from Middle-earth brought fragrances of distant mountains and starflowers. When she opened her eyes, her decision crystallized with startling clarity. "I choose both," she said firmly. "Lily deserves to know where she comes from, all of where she comes from. She should understand her human heritage and her magical legacy." Gandalf's eyes twinkled. A wise choice. And practical, too. The worlds need guardians who understand both realms. But I won't hide away like my grandmother did. If I'm going to be the guardian, I'll do it openly. I'll help others who might stumble through the portal, guide them safely. A bridge rather than a barrier, Elrond approved. Maya stepped fully into the roundhouse, feeling the space expand around her as it had that first night. But now she understood. It wasn't growing larger, she was growing larger, becoming big enough to hold two worlds in her heart. Lily stirred in her sleep and opened impossibly blue eyes that reflected both starlight and aurora. For just a moment, Maya could have sworn she saw ancient wisdom in that infant gaze, as if her daughter already understood the gift she'd been given. "Welcome home," Maya whispered, unsure if she was speaking to her daughter or to herself. The Silmarill's light settled into a steady glow, no longer the desperate beacon it had been during the crisis, but rather a gentle lighthouse marking safe harbor for travelers between worlds. Outside, the aurora danced more brilliantly than ever, and Maya realized it would always dance here now. A permanent bridge of light spanning the space between magic and mundane, between who she had been and who she was becoming.